Kamlan caused quite a stir when it released its original 50mm f1.1 lens, marketed as the Bokeh Beast, as it was one of the fastest lenses available for crop sensor cameras.
Faster than a speeding bullet.
However, while it was a plucky overachiever for a manual focus lens that only cost £130, it did fall optically short in more than a few areas.
Faster than a bullet.
So, when the Kamlan 50mm f1.1 Mark II was announced for Sony E, Fuji X, Canon EOS M and Micro Four Thirds mounts, the hype was palpable. With a slightly higher price of £180 or $230, it promises to improve on the original's limitations and up the ante in terms of those beautiful blurry backgrounds. So I grabbed my favourite model and my favourite camera, the Olympus Pen F, and took the lens out to shoot some portraits to see just how well the new Bokeh Beast performs. The Kamlan creates fantastic subject separation and turns even the busiest backgrounds into a buttery smooth mush. The shallow depth of field can be used to carve a narrow slice of focus out of your scene, and it's thin enough to isolate individual eyes if you really want to draw the viewer's attention to a specific part of an image. While the Kamlan is in no way intended for the job, it performs surprisingly well as a macro lens thanks to its elongated focal length, and the fact that the f1.1 aperture enables you to shoot with high shutter speeds, compensating for that inevitable shake as you manual focus. Its close focus limit of 1.3 feet means that you can't get quite as close to your subjects as you might like, but even cropped all the way in, the images retain a pleasing amount of detail and a surprising amount of sharpness. The lens renders images with a real sense of dimensionality, which is obviously amplified when you're shooting macro photographs. Now, while f1.1 lenses are a rarity, the Kamlan isn't the fastest lens. In fact, it isn't even the fastest at this price point, because you've got things like the Mitakon Speedmaster 25mm f0.95. So yes, it's a little bit wider, but it's also a little bit faster. And even though this is £180, it's not the cheapest lens in this category either, because you've got things like the Olympus 45mm f1.8, which is a very similar focal length, but quite a bit slower. So given that these lenses are quite similar either in terms of focal length or in terms of the aperture, I thought it'd be only fair and only fun to take them for a bit of a three-way dance and see how they perform in blurry background portraiture stakes. Here's the first shot, taken on the Kamlan. You can see that the flowers in the background have been reduced to pleasingly large, soapy bokeh balls. Now here's the Olympus, with a similar focal length but a narrower f1.8 aperture. The bokeh balls are much harder and smaller, though the image is much sharper. And here's the Speedmaster, with a totally different focal length but a faster f0.95 aperture. The results are a cross between the other two, with smaller bokeh balls that are still soapy but quite a bit noisier. As expected, the Kamlan and Olympus share the same field of view, but the bokeh of the Ollie lens is limited by its slower aperture. And while the Speedmaster has a faster aperture, its shorter focal length reduces the depth of field, making its bokeh comparatively less impressive. If you want blurry backgrounds for portraits, the Kamlan is definitely the way to go. Now, although the Kamlan is a 50mm f1.1 lens, bear in mind that the effective focal length and aperture will be affected by the crop factor of your sensor. So on Sony and Fuji bodies, it becomes a 75mm f1.65, on the Canon EOS M it becomes an 80mm f1.75, and on Micro Four Thirds cameras like the Olympus, it becomes a 100mm f2.2. Now that aperture only relates to effective depth of field. In terms of light transmission, it's still going to be an f1.1 lens, so it's ideal for working in low light conditions, but the f1.1 becomes an f2.2 or whatever it is, based on the crop factor of your camera, but that's purely in terms of the amount of background blur you're going to get in your images or in your videos. The Kamlan 50mm f1.1 Mark II is a cracker of a lens. What surprised me the most is how well built it is. You wouldn't necessarily expect build quality to be a priority on a Chinese lens that only cost 180 quid, but you'd be very, very wrong. I mean, check out for starters the fact that the lens cap isn't some generic knockoff eBay special. It's an actual branded Kamlan lens cap designed specifically for this lens. And the same goes for the back cap. They're not generic, cheap couple of quid things. They're proper lenses made, proper caps made for this lens. And the same goes for the lens hood. And first of all, it actually comes with a lens hood, which a lot of Olympus lenses don't come with lens hoods, but check this out. It's metal. It's got a metal lens hood. That's nothing to be sniffed at. So this is a pretty nifty little setup. It weighs about 600 grams, so it's a substantial thing. I mean, you can feel it's going to be unbalanced on smaller bodies. I'm using it with an Olympus Pen F. In Micro Four Thirds terms, that's sort of a middle-sized camera. You wouldn't want to use it with the smaller pens, probably the OMD bodies it's ideal for, the Lumix bodies it's ideal for, and when you get to aps-c terms, those cameras are slightly larger anyway, but it's certainly a sizable, substantial lens, and just check out the machining of this thing, so you can get that in focus there. So, there's a little bit of focus extension, but the actual focus ring is nicely damped, it moves nice and smoothly. The aperture ring is, I wouldn't call it stiff, but it's certainly firm, which is good because when it comes to actually moving this thing during shooting, you don't want to accidentally knock it while you're trying to change the focus. So the fact that it's kind of firm is good in my book. It's also clickless, so it's ideal for shooting video. A lot of videographers will want to use this lens to get that super shallow depth of field, and the fact that it doesn't click, big bonus. Now I don't think I'm exactly in focus because it's a manual focus lens and it's all the way over there and I'm all the way over here, but I think you'll be able to see, compared to the lens I was using before, which was the Olympus 1240 2.8 Pro, which is a great lens, but shooting at f1.1 with the Kamlan, you can see just how much more creamy and dreamy and blurry and out of focus the background is, whether you're shooting for stills or for video work. The lens now has 8 elements in 7 groups, where the original only had 5 in 5, so the quality of the bokeh has definitely improved, as the first lens had much noisier onion ring bokeh. It's much sharper wide open too. In fact, when you can zoom right in and see so much detail in things like eyelashes, I'd categorise it as bloody sharp. Centre sharpness was great, and although it's a little bit softer in the corners, as you'd expect, vignetting was a non-issue and distortion is well controlled. However, like its predecessor, this lens is very much prone to chromatic aberrations. In high contrast scenes, you can see that purple fringing can be quite pronounced, and the lens also tends to bloom in certain situations as well. Now, I didn't shoot at anything other than f1.1 because, well, why would you buy this lens and shoot at f4? I've got plenty of slower lenses to do that. However, we did do some lab tests at work, and the lens takes a big leap in sharpness from f2, and f4 to f5.6 is where you'll get the minimum aberrations and the sharpest performance in the centre and in the corners. What I absolutely love about this lens is that it is so characterful. And I don't mean that in the same way that we describe a lot of old vintage lenses as having character because they're a bit soft and a bit crap. I mean that this lens has soul and it has personality and it's got life to it. And that's really what's missing with so many modern lenses, even the great ones, is that they are clinical and they're optically flawless and they're precise and they're razor sharp from edge to edge and they tick all the boxes on the little charts. But they're not that much fun to shoot with, and that's why so many people, especially people who shoot portraiture, which this lens is designed for portraiture, will reach for an old vintage lens like an old Takuma or an old, Carl Zeiss lens, because they're a little bit optically off-kilter, and they give you that tactility and that verisimilitude and that quality that modern super sharp lenses just don't give you. The fact that this lens it's f1.1, and yes, that does translate to f2.2 or f1.75, depending on what system you're using, but it enables you to shoot with the kind of dreamy depth of field that is otherwise only possible on full-frame sensors. And the fact that it lets you shoot that way on crop sensor cameras like Micro Four Thirds or the aps-c cameras, it makes this an incredibly powerful creative tool. And for that reason, I mean, for 180 quid or 230 bucks, you can't fault this lens, you just can't. You can say that wide open it's not as sharp as the Canon RF 85 1.2. Yeah, it's not. Nor would I want it to be. Because this lens isn't that lens. This is a manual focus vintage feeling lens that shoots a little bit soft at the edges and super creamy in the background. It's not supposed to be a clinical lens, it's supposed to have character, and that's exactly what it is, that's exactly what it does, and that's why, for my money, this is one of the very best lenses you can possibly buy on the crop sensor systems. The Kamlan 50mm f1.1 is a fabulous little lens. Its equivalent focal length makes it perfect for portraits, though it's versatile enough to work as a light telephoto street photography lens. And it can even turn its hand to macro if you're feeling really brave. Between the gorgeous images it delivers, the impressive build quality, and the phenomenally low price tag, there's almost nothing not to love about this lens. The Bokeh Beast is dead. Long live the new Bokeh Beast.